The snow had a way of softening everything. Even the harsh lines of the wooden church on the hill seemed gentler beneath its white blanket. Flakes drifted slow from the sky, like pieces of torn lace, carried by the steady winter wind across the wide Wyoming plain. The town of Willow Creek lay hushed that morning, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting for something it could not yet name. Out on the church steps, a crowd had gathered. Men in long coats stamped their boots, muttering to one another. Women kept to the edges, their scarves pulled tight against the wind, faces sharp with judgment and curiosity. Children clung to skirts, peeking out with wide eyes. It was not often that something happened in Willow Creek to draw them all together, and yet, here they were watching her. Clara went and knelt in the snow at the bottom of the steps. Her dress, once a soft blue, was now worn thin, its hem ragged from years of use. It clung to her as if the cloth itself feared to be seen. She held her hands in her lap, the cold biting at her knuckles, but she did not lift them to warm her face. Her eyes stayed down, fixed on the snow that melted beneath her breath. They had called her a bride. That was the cruelest part, not because it was untrue she had been promised, once, long ago, but because the word was always followed by a snicker. The bride, they whispered, the one nobody wanted, the heavy one, the girl left behind. It was not weight alone that made them laugh. It was the way she carried it, the slow steps, the shy posture, the constant attempt to make herself smaller than she was. She had learned to bow her head before others could raise theirs. That habit had clung to her through the years, and the town had never let her forget it. A man's voice broke the hush. Looks like she finally showed her face. Clara felt the words land against her back. She kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that answering only fed the fire. But then, from the crowd, came a sound unlike the others. A small gasp, high and clear, like a bird calling out through the storm. A little girl stepped forward, clutching a worn teddy bear to her chest. Her boots sank into the snow as she moved with all the boldness of someone too young to understand cruelty. She stopped just a few feet from Clara, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Daddy," she said, her voice carrying farther than she knew. "She's pretty." The crowd shifted. Some smirked, others frowned, but the words lingered in the air, more stubborn than the falling snow. Behind the girl stood her father. Marshall Kane was not a man easily ignored. Tall, with broad shoulders beneath a long brown coat, he carried himself like one accustomed to silence and respect. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, but the square set of his jaw was clear enough. His hand rested at his side, near the holster that had earned him his reputation. Yet in that moment, it was not his gun that drew attention. It was the way he looked at his daughter, surprised, softened, uncertain. Clara raised her eyes then, just enough to see. The girl stared at her with all the innocence of 5 years, the teddy bear dangling from one arm, her small fingers pointing as if to prove the truth she saw. Clara's throat tightened. Pretty. The word felt foreign, almost cruel, because it had not belonged to her in many years. She wanted to shake her head, to deny it before the crowd laughed again, but the child's gaze held her still. No laughter came, not yet. Instead, there was a pause, heavy as the clouds above. Snowflakes drifted down between them, unhurried, as though even winter itself had stopped to listen. Marshall stepped forward at last. His boots crunched against the snow, measured and steady. The crowd parted without being asked. No one wished to block his path. He came to stand just behind his daughter, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Abigail," he said quietly, his voice low but carrying. "Stay close." The girl looked up at him, then back to Clara. She did not move. "But Daddy," she said again, softer now. "She's pretty." Clara's hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them tighter together, trying to hide the motion. Her chest ached with a mix of shame and longing, as though the child had touched some locked door inside her heart. Pretty. Once, long ago, she had been called that by her mother, in the quiet of their small cabin before life had worn them both thin. Once, a boy in town had said it too before he chose another girl, quicker with laughter and lighter on her feet. Since then, the word had vanished from her world, replaced by silence and sideways glances. Now it had returned, carried by a voice untainted by cruelty, spoken as if it were the simplest truth in the world. The men on the steps shifted again, clearing their throats. Some looked away. Others studied Marshall, waiting to see if he would laugh like the rest or if his daughter's words had bound him to a different path. The church bell rang then, a deep, slow sound that rolled over the town and echoed through the valley. Its toll marked the hour, but to Clara it felt like a summons, pulling her into a moment she could not escape. She lifted her head fully for the first time. Her eyes met Marshall's. There was no laughter in them, no pity, either, only a steady regard. as though he were measuring something not yet spoken. The crowd began to murmur again, but Clara barely heard. She felt the snow falling softer now, the cold less sharp. She felt the child's gaze still fixed on her, a strange, fragile bridge stretched between them. And for the first time in many years, she wondered if perhaps her story was not yet finished. Clara did not rise from the snow right away. Even after the church bell stopped ringing and the townsfolk began to stir, she remained there, half kneeling, half folded into herself. The weight of the moment pressed down like a second winter, heavier than the flakes that clung to her hair and lashes. She had been in this position before, though never in so public a place. For years she had lived beneath the gaze of Willow Creek, a gaze quick to judge, slow to forgive. It was easier to keep her head bowed, to stay at the edge of the crowd rather than its center. Yet now, somehow, she had been pulled forward. The whispers began again. "Why is she here?" Someone muttered. "She thinks she's still a bride, that's why," another said, the word bride laced with scorn. "Poor fool, doesn't know when to quit." Clara's fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt. She wanted to vanish into the snow, to let it swallow her whole until no one could see her at all. But another sound cut through the whispering soft laughter, not mocking this time, but the innocent giggle of a child. Abigail had crouched down, setting her teddy bear carefully on the snow as though it deserved its own place of honor. She patted the bear's head, then looked up at Clara with wide, earnest eyes. "You can hold him if you want," the girl said. Clara blinked. For a moment, the world tilted. Of all the things she had expected, more cruelty, another insult, perhaps even a stone thrown her way. She had not expected this. A gift, freely offered. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Marshall's voice broke in gently, though there was steel beneath it. "Abigail." The girl turned her head up toward her father. "It's all right, Daddy. He likes her." She gave Clara a conspiratorial nod, as though sharing a secret meant only for them. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some chuckled at the child's boldness. Others frowned. The unspoken rule of Willow Creek was that Clara Winton was fair game, a safe target for ridicule. Yet here was a child, Marshall Kane's child. No less offering kindness where none dared. Marshall did not scold his daughter. He only studied Clara again, his hand resting firm on Abigail's shoulder. His silence was its own kind of shield, thin though it was. Clara gathered her strength and finally shook her head, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Thank you, child. But you keep him close. It's cold." Abigail tilted her head, considering. Then she hugged the teddy bear to her chest again and nodded solemnly. The small exchange hung in the air, delicate as glass, a past that would not stay buried that night. In the small boarding room she rented above the cooper's shop, Clara replayed the moment until her heart ached with it. She sat by the narrow window, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders, watching the snow continue to fall. She had not meant to draw attention that day. She rarely did, but word had spread that Marshall Kane was looking for help, someone to tend his household, to care for his little girl since the passing of his wife 2 winters before. Clara had thought perhaps, just perhaps, she might be given a chance. She knew what the town thought of her. Too heavy, too plain, too quiet. But she also knew how to mend, how to cook, how to keep a home warm against the bitter cold. She had hoped Marshall would see that, if not for himself, then for the child who deserved more than the careless help of neighbors. Instead, the moment had turned into a spectacle. She had heard the laughter, the whispers of the bride again. It was a name she could never shake, born from a broken promise that had haunted her since she was barely 20. Once, she had been engaged. Nathan Carter had been his name, a young ranch hand with quick hands and quicker charm. He had spoken sweetly, told her she was beautiful when no one else would. She had believed him, believed enough to let herself dream of a small home, children, a place in the world where she might belong. But Nathan had left her for another, livelier, the kind of woman townsfolk approved of. Clara had been left with nothing but a dress she never wore, a word produced only as a weapon. That was nearly 10 years past, yet the wound had never closed. Each time she walked down Main Street, she felt the eyes. Each time laughter rose behind her, she wondered if it was at her expense. And yet, the little girl's voice echoed in her mind. "She's pretty, Daddy." No one had spoken those words to her in so long that it felt like a dream, fragile and unlikely. And it had not been said by a man seeking to charm her or by a woman pitying her. It had been spoken by a child, earnest, simple, without guile. Clara pressed the quilt tighter around her. For the first time in years, she let herself smile, just a little. Marshall's burden across town, in a cabin set against the rising slope of the hills. Marshall Kane sat by the fire with his daughter curled in his lap. Abigail had fallen asleep clutching her bear, her small breaths steady against his chest. Marshall brushed a strand of golden hair from her face and let his gaze linger on the flames. He was a man who carried silence well, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. He had seen Clara Winton kneeling in the snow, her face pale but proud in its own quiet way. He had seen the town mocking her, as they always did, and he had seen his daughter step forward, fearless, her words cutting through the cruelty like sunlight through clouds. Pretty. Marshall had not thought of Clara in such terms. Truth be told, he had not thought much of her at all. She was part of the town's backdrop or was there, always quiet, a figure to be pitied and dismissed. But his daughter's words had unsettled him. Children, he knew, did not lie about such things. They saw the world without the layers of scorn adults carried. If Abigail said Clara was pretty, perhaps she saw something the rest of them had forgotten how to see. Marshall shifted slightly, careful not to wake his daughter. He remembered his late wife Ellen, her gentle laugh, her steady hands, the way she had filled their home with warmth. 2 winters had passed since illness took her, but the ache remained. He had managed as best he could, but Abigail needed more than a father who spent his days on horseback and his nights too tired to smile. Clara Winton had come to the church that morning because she sought work. Marshall knew it, and though the town mocked her, he could not ignore the thought that maybe, just maybe, she was the answer he had been searching for. The fire cracked. Marshall's eyes narrowed. He was not a man swayed by gossip, but he was not blind either. Taking Clara into his home would stir talk. Men would laugh. Women would sneer, but his daughter's words echoed still, stubborn as the wind. She's pretty. Daddy and Marshall wondered for the first time if he ought to see for himself what Abigail had seen all along. The next morning dawned grey and bitter. The snow had slowed, but the cold cut sharper than before. The kind of cold that worked its way through walls and clothing until it reached the bones. Clara rose early from her narrow bed in the boarding room, her breath a pale mist in the dim light. She lit the small stove with trembling hands, setting water to boil for tea. Her body ached from the hours she had spent kneeling yesterday, but the ache inside, deeper, quieter, was harder to name. She thought of leaving Willow Creek. She thought of it often. There were other towns, other places where a woman might start fresh, even if the world was never truly kind. But each time she planned, something bound her still, her mother's grave on the hill, the scraps of work she managed, the faint hope that tomorrow might not be as cruel as yesterday. And now, a child's voice lingered in her memory. She's pretty, Daddy. Clara touched her face as though testing if the word had left some mark. Of course, it hadn't, but something inside her had shifted all the same. An unexpected knock by noon. She was bent over her mending when the knock came. It was firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that did not ask, but announced. Clara's heart jumped. No one visited her here. She opened the door slowly, expecting the landlord or perhaps another tenant. Instead, Marshall Kane stood there, the brim of his hat dusted with snow. Abigail clung to his side, her bear peeking out from beneath her arm. Clara's breath caught. She glanced around quickly, half expecting to see neighbors watching, but the street was quiet. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice low. Ma'am, he replied with a short nod. His voice was steady, but his eyes studied her carefully, as if weighing every word before he spoke. Might we come in? Clara hesitated. The room was small, plain, hardly fit for guests, but refusing him seemed impossible. She stepped aside. Abigail skipped in first, setting her bear carefully on Clara's narrow chair before looking around with wide curiosity. Marshall followed, his presence filling the little space. Clara stood by the stove, her hands twisting together. Can I offer you tea? It's weak, but warm. Marshall shook his head. No need. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then he said, I came to ask you about yesterday. Clara's stomach tightened. Yesterday, you came to the church, he said. Looking for work, her cheeks burned. Of course he had noticed. Of course he knew why she had been there. I thought maybe your little girl might need someone. I didn't mean to cause a scene. Marshall's eyes softened, though his voice remained even. The scene wasn't yours to cause. The fault lies with those who mocked. Clara blinked. Few in Willow Creek ever spoke so plainly on her behalf. He went on. I won't waste words. I need someone steady in my home. Someone who can cook, mend, keep the place fit for a child. Abigail deserves more than neighbors checking in out of pity. Clara's hands trembled against her skirt. You mean, you'd hire me? Marshall nodded once. If you're willing. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say yes at once, but fear tangled the word on her tongue. She thought of the whispers, the smirks, the endless laughter that would follow her every step if she moved into the Kane cabin. As though sensing her hesitation, Abigail piped up from the chair, swinging her small legs. Please come, Miss Clara. Daddy makes porridge every morning, but it's lumpy. You'd do better. Marshall cast his daughter a look, but Clara could not help smiling, faint though it was. I can cook more than porridge, she said softly. Abigail beamed. Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. Still, she hesitated. The town, they'll talk. They already do, Marshall said simply. Let them. I don't answer to them. His words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through her fear. For years, she had been shaped by what others thought. To hear someone dismiss it so easily felt strange, almost dangerous. She looked at Abigail, who hugged her bear tight, and smiled as though the matter was already settled. And Clara realized that, for the first time in a very long while, she was being asked not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. She swallowed hard. Yes, she whispered. I'll come the road to the cabin the next day. Clara packed her few belongings into a single bag. The streets seemed to watch her as she climbed into Marshall's wagon. Abigail squeezed tight against her side. Whispers followed. As expected, a woman from the general store hissed to her companion. Look, they're Clara's off again, chasing after some man. Another muttered, poor Marshall. Doesn't he know better? Clara kept her eyes forward, her hands clutching the bag on her lap. Marshall drove the wagon without comment, his face set against the cold wind. Abigail leaned against Clara as though she had known her forever. The ride carried them beyond the town, into the hills where snow lay thick on the pines. The cabin appeared at last sturdy, smoke curling from its chimney, horses shifting in the corral. Clara's breath caught. It was not grand, but it was more home than she had ever known. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and leather, faintly touched with the sweetness of Abigail's soap. The fire crackled warmly. You'll have the small room, Marshall said, setting her bag down. It's plain, but it's yours. Clara stepped inside, her hand brushing the rough-hewn frame of the bed. Tears pricked her eyes. A room of her own, in a house not rented by the week, not shadowed by gossip. She had nearly forgotten what such a thing felt like. When she turned, Abigail was already tugging at her hand. Come see the kitchen, please. Daddy says it's yours now. Clara followed, her heart unsteady, as though she were walking into a dream. A shift at the table that evening, Clara cooked. She made stew from the stores in the pantry, biscuits from scratch, and even a small pie with the last of the apples. Her hands moved with ease she had not felt in years, each motion steady, sure. When the food was set on the table, Abigail clapped her hands with delight. It smells better already. Marshall sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He tasted the stew, then nodded once. Good. The word was simple, but to Clara it felt heavier than a paragraph of praise. Her chest warmed. As they ate, Abigail chattered about her day, how she had found a rabbit's tracks in the snow, how she thought her teddy bear might like a new scarf. Clara listened, smiling, adding a word here and there. Marshall said little, but his silence no longer felt distant. It was steady, grounding, a silence that welcomed rather than shut out. For the first time in years, Clara did not feel like an outsider at a table. Later, when Abigail had gone to bed, Clara lingered by the fire, folding the day's laundry. Marshall stood at the window, looking out at the snow. She took to you quick, he said at last. Clara's hand stilled. Children are kinder than grown folk. He glanced at her, sometimes truer too. She lowered her eyes, heat rising in her cheeks. Marshall turned back to the window, his voice quieter. I meant what I said. Let the town talk. What matters is my home, and my girl. Clara's throat tightened. For so long she had let others define her worth. To hear him speak as though their words carried no weight, it stirred something deep, something dangerous and tender all at once. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, nothing more, but in the quiet, Clara felt the beginning of something she had long thought lost respect, and beneath it, a fragile seed of hope. The days passed slowly, measured by the steady rhythm of winter. Clara settled into the cane cabin with a mixture of wonder and unease, as though every moment might still vanish if she blinked too hard. She rose early, tending the fire before Marshall came in from the barn. She cooked meals, patched clothes, and taught Abigail little songs her mother had once sung. In the evenings, she read aloud from the single book she owned, her voice soft while Abigail curled against her side with the teddy bear. At first, Clara moved carefully, afraid of taking too much space, but soon she found herself humming as she worked, even laughing when Abigail tried to copy her stitching and ended up with a tangled mess of thread. The cabin, once quiet and sparse, began to carry warmth again, whispers beyond the cabin but outside those walls. The whispers grew louder. At the mercantile, Clara overheard women clucking their tongues. Poor Marshall, one said, too loudly. Imagine saddling himself with her. Must be desperation, another replied. No other explanation. At the blacksmith's, men smirked as Marshall walked past. Guess he couldn't do better, eh? Marshall never answered. His silence was sharp enough to quiet most, but the whispers still clung to the air. Clara bore it, as she always had, head down, lips pressed tight. Yet now the words cut deeper, for they no longer mocked only her. They mocked the man who had given her shelter, and the child who had called her pretty. That night, as she stirred stew at the stove, Clara's shoulders trembled with the weight of it. She told herself she should leave, that it would be kinder to Marshall and Abigail. But when she glanced back, Abigail sat at the table, drawing pictures in the lamplight, her face content. Marshall was by the hearth, repairing a bridle. For the first time, Clara realized that leaving would wound them both, and so she stayed. A quiet defense. One afternoon, Marshall rode into town for supplies. Clara accompanied him, though she dreaded the stairs. Abigail skipped between them, chattering about the ribbons she hoped to see at the general store. As they entered, the room hushed. Men leaned on barrels, women froze mid-bargain, all eyes settling on Clara. Heat rushed to her face. Afternoon, Marshall said evenly, tipping his hat. His voice carried a weight that demanded response. The storekeeper cleared his throat. Mr. Kane, Miss Winton. Clara tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. She busied herself with choosing flour and salt, pretending not to hear the murmurs. But then one man muttered, too close, too cruel. Bride again, eh? Surprised she fits through the door. A few laughed. Clara froze, shame rising hot. Her hand shook as she reached for the sack of flour. Marshall turned, his gaze cut like a blade. You got something useful to say, Bill? The room went still. The man swallowed, shifting his weight. Just joking, Kane. Marshall's jaw tightened. Then joke elsewhere. No one else spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by Abigail tugging at Clara's sleeve, whispering, don't listen, Miss Clara. Daddy's here. Clara's throat burned. She blinked hard, refusing tears. For years, she had endured mockery alone. Now, for the first time, someone had stood between her and the cruelty. When they left the store, the sky was heavy with clouds. Clara walked beside the wagon in silence, her bag clutched close. Thank you, she whispered at last. Marshall looked down at her, his expression steady. You don't owe thanks. No one's got the right to speak that way. But to Clara, it meant more than he knew. Finding her place as the weeks slipped by, Clara grew more certain in her role. She baked bread that filled the cabin with a golden scent. She mended Marshall's shirts until they looked nearly new. She even showed Abigail how to braid her hair, laughing when the child's fingers tangled hopelessly. One evening, when the snow pressed heavy against the windows, Abigail climbed onto Clara's lap and whispered, I wish you were my mama. The words pierced Clara's heart. She held the child close, her eyes filling. I'm not your mama, little one, but I'll take care of you, as long as you'll have me. Abigail nodded solemnly. That's good enough. Marshall heard, though he said nothing. Later, when Clara rose to put Abigail to bed, he caught her eye. His gaze held something softer than before, though he did not speak it. Spring crept slowly into the valley, loosening winter's grip, but with the thaw came sharper tongues. At Sunday service, whispers followed them down the aisle. Kane's got himself a housemaid, does he? Or is it more, she's still wearing that old dress? Can't believe she shows her face. Clara felt the heat of every stare. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, but Abigail held her hand tight, swinging it back and forth as though daring the world to say otherwise. And when the sermon ended, Abigail climbed onto the pew and announced loudly, Miss Clara makes the best pies in the world. A ripple of laughter spread, but this time, it wasn't cruel. A few even smiled. Clara's cheeks burned, but her heart swelled. The quiet of evening that night, after Abigail had fallen asleep, Clara stood on the porch. The air was cool, scented with pine. The stars spread wide above, endless and bright. Marshall stepped out beside her, the boards creaking beneath his boots. For a while, they stood in silence. You've done good here, he said at last. Clara lowered her eyes. I've only done what needed doing. He shook his head. You've done more. My girl laughs again. The house feels alive. That's your doing. Her throat tightened. I never thought I'd be welcome anywhere. Marshall's gaze lingered on her face. You are here. The words were simple, steady, but they rooted deep. Clara turned toward the stars again, afraid her heart might give her away. A seed of hope. The days grew longer. Snow melted from the hills, leaving the earth dark and ready for planting. Clara planted herbs by the porch with Abigail, teaching her which leaves healed burns and which made stew taste sweeter. The cabin thrummed with life, and slowly, Clara began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged, but the town had not forgotten. And though Marshall's silence shielded her, she knew the storm was not yet over. Still, when she lay down at night, she held to one sound stronger than all the whispers, Abigail's voice, calling her pretty, as if it were the truest word in the world. The first true warmth of spring had come, and with it the town's fair. Every year, the community gathered for games, stalls, and contests that marked the turning of the season. Marshall insisted they attend. "It'll do Abigail good," he said, adjusting the collar of his clean shirt. "She needs to be around other children." Clara hesitated. The thought of facing the town, those eyes, those whispers tightened her chest, but Abigail's excitement was unshakable. She twirled in her dress, begging Clara to braid her hair. "Please come, Miss Clara," she said, hands clasped. "It won't be fun without you." Clara could never deny her. And so, they went. The fair was a whirl of color and sound, bright banners snapping in the breeze, the smell of roasted corn, the laughter of children darting between stalls. Clara walked with careful steps, her plain dress fluttering at her ankles. She carried Abigail's hand, while Marshall kept close on the other side. At first it almost felt ordinary. Abigail played games, winning a ribbon she proudly pinned to Clara's shawl. Marshall bought them fried apples, the sugar sweet on their fingers. Clara even smiled. But then the whispers began again. "Look at her, can't believe. Kane drags her out in public. She'll eat the whole stall if they let her." Each word struck like a stone. Clara tried to steady herself, but her vision blurred. She wanted to run, to hide, but Abigail's small hand gripped hers tightly, keeping her rooted. And then it happened. At the pie contest, Clara carried the entry she had baked the night before, with a crust that had come out perfectly golden. Abigail had begged her to enter. Everyone should taste it, the girl had said, but as Clara set the pie on the table, a group of women tittered nearby. One, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, leaned in close enough for others to hear. "Hope there's enough left for the rest of us, with her around." The crowd chuckled. Someone else added, "Maybe she made 3 pies and ate 2 on the way." Laughter rippled through the fair. Clara froze, her hands trembling. Heat burned her cheeks, shame pressing so heavy she could hardly breathe. Her instinct was to lower her head, to vanish, but then Abigail stomped her little foot. "She's pretty, Daddy," she shouted, her voice carrying over the laughter. Her small face blazed with defiance. "Miss Clara is prettier than all of them." The laughter broke, replaced by stunned silence. Clara's breath caught. Her throat closed around a sob she tried desperately to hold back. Marshall stepped forward, his broad frame casting a long shadow. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel in it. "That's enough." The crowd shifted uneasily. "Every one of you," Marshall continued, "ought to be ashamed. She's worked harder, shown more kindness, and carried more dignity than I've seen in half this town combined." No one moved, no one spoke. Marshall placed a steady hand on Clara's shoulder. "She belongs with us, with me, and if any man or woman here has something to say against it, say it to me." Silence. Eyes dropped. Boots shuffled. No one dared, and in that silence, something changed. Clara, for the first time in her life, did not feel small. A new light for judges cut slices of pie, their faces softening as they tasted. The flavor was perfect: sweet apples, cinnamon, a flaky crust. "This," the head judge announced, "is the finest pie of the day." Applause rose, hesitant at first, then genuine. Clara stood still, hardly believing. The ribbon was pressed into her hand, but her eyes blurred too much to see it. Abigail squealed, hugging her waist. "See, Miss Clara, I told you." Marshall's eyes met hers. For once, there was no guarded silence, no distance, only truth. The walk home that evening. They walked home as the sun sank low, painting the sky with streaks of gold. Abigail skipped ahead, clutching the ribbon. Clara and Marshall walked side by side. "You didn't have to do that," Clara murmured. "Not for me." Marshall's gaze was steady. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was right." He hesitated, clearing his throat. "Truth is, I meant every word." Clara's breath caught. She turned away, blinking back tears. "I've never heard anyone speak for me before." "Get used to it," he said quietly. A gentle twist that night. After Abigail was tucked in, Marshall lingered by the fire. Clara sat at the table, mending his shirt, though her hands moved slowly. Finally, Marshall spoke. "Clara," she looked up, startled. "You've given us more than I ever hoped for. My daughter smiles again. My home feels alive again, and me." His voice faltered, rare for him. I find myself looking forward to every day, because you're in it. Her breath trembled. Marshall. He stepped closer, the firelight catching the lines of his face. I don't care what this town thinks. I don't care what they whisper. What matters is what's here. He touched his chest, then gently laid his hand over hers. If you'll stay, I'd like to make this a real family. Not just for Abigail. For me. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. For so long she had believed she was unworthy of love. Now, here was a man offering it freely, steadily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Yes, I'll stay." The ending weeks later. Clara walked into town again, but this time, her head was high. Abigail held one hand, Marshall the other. The whispers still stirred, but softer now, uncertain. People who once mocked now nodded politely. Some even smiled, not because the town had changed overnight, but because Clara had. She was no longer the woman who lowered her eyes and shrank away. She was the woman who had been called pretty by a child's honest heart, and who had finally believed it at the general store. Abigail tugged on Clara's hand and declared proudly, "This is my mama now." Clara's throat tightened, but she smiled, her heart steady. "That's right." And Marshall, standing tall beside them, simply nodded. The world had not suddenly grown kinder, but within that little family, kindness had bloomed enough to last a lifetime. Closing note for narration. And so, the bride they mocked found love not through the eyes of the world, but through the eyes of a child, eyes that saw truth when no one else dared. She was pretty. She was wanted. She was loved. At last, Clara was home.